So I'm Melissa, the Executive Director here at Highwater Women, and we have a great panel lined up for you tonight. Here at Highwater Women, our mission is to empower women, and we do that through kind of three core programs. We have a financial literacy and empowerment program we've been doing since 2009. We have trained and deployed over 3,200 volunteers who have gone out into community organizations to teach and mentor people around financial literacy, and we've reached 10,000 participants through that program. Our annual backpack drive is in full swing right now. Since 2005, we have sent 150,000 kids, 150,972 kids back to school with smiles on their faces and fully supplied so they can get ready to learn. Our third core area of programming is investing with impact. That is anchored around field building in impact and ESG, and really educating, supporting, and networking people around that content. We launched that program in 2013 with an annual symposium that we ran right up till last year when, like you all, we pivoted to providing that content online. And in that program, we have done 122 impact investing sessions and have about 1,500 people in our network, 79% of which are women. So we are Highwater Women indeed. We have two other new initiatives that have also come to be in the last year. One of them is tonight, our Women of Action initiative, which I'll let Catherine talk a little bit more about that. We also have Decabillion Plus, which is an initiative anchored around catalyzing capital, venture capital for women founders. If you want to know more about how you or your company can get involved in any of that, I'd love to hear from you. I'll post my email in the chat for you on that. Also, before I turn it over to Catherine, a quick appeal. We are Highwater Women. We are a small nonprofit. All of this stuff we do with 1.2 staff members and many, many volunteers and corporate partners. So please consider making a donation to our cause. Can't do it without you. If you spend $4 a day on coffee, that's $120 a month, $1,400 a year. Just saying, how about a cup of coffee for empowering women? Now over to the chair of our Highwater Women Action Committee and our program tonight. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Alyssa pointed out that we're run with 1.2 staff. That's because she's really 3 people in one, and we're very grateful for all that she does for this and for all of the things that Highwater Women cares about, both as an organization and in all of the hats we wear. On behalf of Highwater Women and the Impact Committee, I'm Catherine Bennett, and I'd like to welcome you tonight and thank you all for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule and overused Zoom account to join us today. We hope you'll feel it was well worth your time. This is, as Alyssa said, part of the Women of Action initiative we started in January. One of my Highwater Women colleagues said, did you see that 100% of the women of the job losses in December were women? And I got very upset and thought I needed to do something about that. And what I wanted to do was create a series that helped women understand what they could do about it as well, whether it's through their voices or through their economic power or through their votes, or just by being a shoulder to cry on. However you lend a helping hand, I think it's important that we know that we do have the ability to do something. And I also strongly believe that if we work together, that can be much more powerful. The panelists we have here today are all testaments to how working together allows us all to do more than we could by ourselves. And they've done some extraordinary work. They'll also share with you how they really can do so much more as a group than you think they could do independently. And so I'm very excited to have them share what they're doing and how they approach helping women, both as part of what they do and also as a direct result. I'm very honored that my friend Monique Aiken has agreed to be our moderator tonight. Monique is an extraordinary woman and an extraordinary friend and enormously important voice in the impact investing field in general, as a managing director of the Investment Integration Project, which is a consulting service that also does applied research on thought leadership for investors looking to find to manage systemic risks and opportunities. She's also a contributing editor of ImpactAlpha, where she has started the Reconstruction Project, a podcast about moving capital towards justice. She is, as you will see, passionate about social and systems change and the ability to create positive impact. She's been guiding investors in aligning their social impact and investment objectives for over a decade. I met Monique when I started in the impact and ESG world in 2014. A very old and dear friend of ours, mutual friend, said to both of us, "You have to know each other." And he is always right. And this proved to be one of the great relationships I have built as a result of being in this space in the responsible investing world. I want to thank so many of you whose names and faces I know for joining us tonight. I look forward to the fact that you'll all get to share some time for networking after the panel, and hope you will stay to meet each other and to share your own ideas, because each of your voices is so important to everything we do. And with that, Monique, take it away, please.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. The feeling is mutual, Catherine, and I'm delighted and honored to call you friend. And as I was thinking about this particular conversation today, and the she session that you all talk about, and the wonderful panelists that we have here with us, who you'll hear from more in a moment, I was thinking about what analogy do we have here? And people often use the term punching above your weight. But I'm not a pugilist, and I don't really care for boxing other than Muhammad Ali's float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, but like, that's it. I was like, we can do better in terms of analogies that maybe speak more to women. I thought about silk strands woven into a rope, and or making a tapestry, and how we can think about other metaphors of being stronger together, like someone important tried to say a handful of years ago, though we are truly stronger together. So as I thought about who else and what else can I use for inspiration, another fighter came to mind. I mean, I think of myself as a fighter for justice and liberation and systems change in my work and in side jobs and side hustles. But my family background is from the Caribbean. My parents are immigrants from Jamaica. And there's a woman by the name of Queen Nanny, who I draw inspiration from, that if you've ever been to Jamaica, you might have seen, because her face is on the $500 bill. But you probably didn't know the backstory. But she was born in 1686, probably what was in present day Ghana. She was from the Ashanti people, and she was stolen like many others and taken from her homeland and brought to Jamaica. And in time, she and other enslaved Africans,
Chloe,
who were known as Maroons, escaped to the Blue Mountains. And you might have had coffee from Jamaica, which comes from that region. And they lived freely among the indigenous people who were there. And to make a long story short, Queen Nanny, in her early 40s, led what was called the First Maroon War, which began around 1728, with next to nothing and clearly up against the strongest, most well-equipped Navy and Army in the world, the British Empire. They, after 10 years, actually had the English wave the white flag, and the peace treaty was signed in 1739. Pound for pound, smart money would have bet against Queen Nanny, but smart money would have lost. And there's a saying in Jamaican patois that says, "Little but taloa," which means small but mighty. Taloa is a bastardization of the word stalwart. So we are also small but mighty. I'm literally 5'2". But when we think about being stronger together, I think about the Maroons and Queen Nanny's band of escapees fighting the British in a guerrilla warfare and triumphing. So we are all fighting battles on different fronts and with different tools and our different areas that we work in with advocacy and as investors and as shareholders. And we can find our strength like Queen Annie did and find our voices so that we don't lose before we even try to compete because we're thinking we're too small. And if she had thought that, she would never have persevered. So what do we have to do to draw inspiration from women like Queen Annie and others in your own lives and cultures and be small but mighty? So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists and think about the ways that they are also fighting on the various fronts. We're going to be joined shortly by Sherry Leiwant and Dina Basket from A Better Balance, Julie Tanner, Managing Director for Social Responsible Investing at Christian Brothers Investment Services, and Dr. Kristin Hull, Founder, CEO, and CIO of NIA Impact Capital. So we're going to begin with Sherry. Sherry, could you share a little bit more about what you are up to at A Better Balance and how you use the power of the law to advance justice for workers so they can care for themselves, their loved ones, without jeopardizing their economic security? And which issues are commanding your attention at the moment?
Yeah, thank you so much. We're so happy to be here and great to meet all of you. A Better Balance is, we are based in New York City, but we are a national organization. We have offices in the South, in Nashville, and we do a lot of work in the South, in the West, in Denver, Colorado, and in DC, in Washington, DC. So we work at the local, state, and national levels. We are a legal advocacy organization. Most of us are lawyers. As you say, using the power of the law to fight for policies, and I'll use a pugilistic term, to fight for policies that will help families, that will help particularly women be able to stay in the workforce while still caring for their families, because that is what has been pushing women out of the workforce, particularly during the last year. The issues that we work on discrimination issues, particularly pregnancy discrimination, caregiver discrimination. Oh my gosh! Discrimination against women generally. We also are fighting very hard around the country and now at the federal level as well for improved paid leave policies, both paid sick days and paid family and medical leave. And that's come to kind of a head right now today. Actually, there was more news out of Washington that there may be a deal for the caring economy, for the caring infrastructure that we need so badly to help women stay in the workforce. Paid family and medical leave, which is our issue, as well as improved childcare funding, also our issue. And home care and the ability of women to work for wages that are appropriate when they're caring for the sick and the elderly. And all of that is part of the care economy infrastructure that's being pushed now in Washington. There's apparently a deal in the Senate to pass some of those policies. We at A Better Balance have been working on those policies around the country now for 15 years. That ABB is a 15-year-old organization and have passed laws in almost every state in the union on either discrimination, improved discrimination protections, or paid sick time, which is now guaranteed in 16 states, paid family medical leave, which is now guaranteed in 9 states, District of Columbia. That's our passion, is really improvement in the laws that are protecting women workers. But our passion is also to help women. We have a clinic that serves women and men who have issues with respect to their family responsibilities. And we have also a very strong outreach and education program to make sure that people know what their rights are, because that is often one of the big problems that we have after we pass the laws. They're meaningless unless people will take advantage of them. And we have a strong, we are working, we feel like these issues affect women at all levels of the economic spectrum and all races. But in particular, we're working to make sure that that the policies that we pass are completely inclusive with respect to both race and also economics. So hopefully that answers the question of what we're doing, but I can let Dina also fill in some of that as well.
Yeah, we're going to turn the mic to Dina in one moment and just, just focusing on the way that you do this work. And in some ways, I think about targeted universalism as an analogy for some of the work that you guys are doing, making the invisible visible and lifting up folks who perhaps would not have had the ability to lift up themselves. Can you share, Dina, a little bit more about how your advocacy efforts extend your mission and some of your recent wins?
Sure. Yeah, and thank you all for having us. I mean, it's just really, it's wonderful to be a part of this discussion. Just to piggyback on, what Sherry was saying, when we founded A Better Balance 15 years ago, there was this just general recognition or cultural belief that these were private problems that workers could solve on their own. You can just figure it out, right? Childcare, figure it out. And I think the pandemic really has laid bare that, that there are real systemic barriers that make it that and lack of support, right? That that particularly punish, women in low wage jobs and women of color. And, as the trends, bear out in terms of who exited the workforce in the last year. I would say that, as Sherry said, these issues certainly impact all of us. We all feel the work, family conflict in one way or another. And when we founded A Better Balance, we saw that these were, it was really a key barrier to gender equality. And again, the pandemic has shined a bright spotlight on that. And so in addition to the, Sherry flagged our core issues, we are really proud that we've helped millions of women, be able to obtain new rights. And, these are, again, just putting in the context of women in professional jobs, many of us work for very, progressive employers that may offer generous leave or flexibility or ability to work from home, right? That allow us to hang on during the pandemic, as hard as it may have been. But there are so many workers who lacked even like a single paid sick day to, care for a sick child or care for themselves when they were ill or, exposed to the virus, or they had a childcare emergency and they have to choose between keeping their kids safe and hanging on to their paycheck, or have a complicated pregnancy and they can't access, water or bathroom breaks on the job, or, they're at high risk for miscarriage and they, are not entitled to light duty because, pregnant workers were excluded from that protection in the law. So we have been, been working on these legislative wins, these legislative policy, these changes around the country, these issues around the country. And I'm proud that, as Sherry said, we've won, paid leave protections in many states, pregnancy accommodation protections to strengthen the law for pregnant and nursing mothers in almost 30 states around the country. And like paid family medical leave, we are now poised to pass the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act on a federal level, which would ensure that all pregnant workers are entitled to accommodations at work. And, it passed the House of Representatives with incredible bipartisan support. We had, in this day and age, to have 103 Republicans support and to have the support of the US Chamber and SHRM, really speaks to sort of, how bipartisan and how business, friendly this is, and how helpful it really, really is to keep women working. So, and the one other thing, we talk about financial literacy and power. I mean, we can talk more about this later, but super proud of, the tremendous amount of know your rights resources and free legal support we provide to workers. I mean, there's just a tremendous information gap, there's a tremendous knowledge gap. And so in addition to the policy-wide work we do a ton of education and empowerment work. So the laws that we work so hard to pass are meaningful and accessible to workers.
And we're so grateful for all of this work that you do, because as I think about needing to, the phrase new rights, and we still have to vote on people's rights in this day and age, is sort of shocking, particularly as someone commented, other places in the world have had these protections for decades. And when we think about workers and labor and how undervalued they've often been in the calculus, as we move to, or we aspire to, a more stakeholder-centered economy, and it's not exclusively shareholder, but there are still interesting wins coming from the shareholder. And I think we're going to bring Julie in here to talk a little bit about her work, demonstrating the power of shareholders to drive positive impact. And the case of engine number one and Exxon is a David and Goliath story that many have heard about, but maybe there's more to the story, and how a merry band of misfits are part of the radical collaboration needed to move such needles and be part of the stronger tapestry we've talking about in order to make change. Julie?
Thank you so much. I'm very proud of that label, Merry Band of Misfits. And, you know, we're talking about women, people of color, challenges and barriers. You know, sometimes we feel powerless and unable to make change. And sometimes nothing can feel as difficult as something like turning the tide on climate change. So I want to share one success story in progress, and that's at ExxonMobil. And it's a tide I helped to turn with a handful of women. And it starts with a tiny, virtually unknown hedge fund called Engine Number One. They had an investment in Exxon in order to achieve change on climate change. They were frustrated by the lack of movement by the company, by Exxon, and they used their power to launch a global campaign to appoint new board members, get fresh experience, new voices on climate change, on renewable energy, and they launched a campaign to unseat board members. And in the shareholder community, this is virtually unheard of. The company rebuffed their call to action. And so Engine Number One sprung into action. And what they did was elicit the media, major investors, small investors like me. I'm with a firm called Christian Brothers Investment Services. And together we were able to unseat 3 board members at ExxonMobil and really change, I think, the tide of oil and gas. You may have seen in the paper some major announcements that came up, and it really is sort of a David and Goliath story. And it really shows that you don't need to be a big investor in a company to make a change. And so I worked on this issue with investors like Sisters of St. Dominic, Maryknoll Sisters, the Presbyterian Church. Together, we filed a resolution calling on the company to take action on climate change, virtually unheard of. It really shocked the company. And we're really looking forward to meeting with them and seeing what particular steps they're going to do. And a shareholder resolution, 500-word statement. All you need is $2,000 in order to file it. And so as small investors, women and faith investors going up against a company like ExxonMobil, calling on them to ensure they're integrating climate change into their financial reports, so shareholders, any of us that own shares, can take action. And I think it's really just an interesting way to use the power of the shareholder ballot. All of us at some point in time may be shareholders. It's an avenue we should look to make change, and make change with other women. And it shows that we can make a difference.
Absolutely, and we are so thankful for those headlines, because I think it empowered many to think, well, if Exxon, what if? And so, Kristin, I think we'll bring you in here now, and if you can share a little bit about your perspective of how portfolio managers and other asset allocators can integrate, you know, some of these thinking into their work, supporting working families and supporting workers to unlock long-term sustainable value, and whether there's tension between some of the legal directives and the moral obligation to get folks to do the right thing.
Well, thank you for this, and thanks for setting us up so well. And thank you to my fellow panelists. It's always an honor and a privilege to be in a room, or a screen in this case, full of awesome, powerful women, because as we know, that's what's needed. And the women on this panel are showing you just samples of how we're each getting it done. We know each of you is also getting it done where you need to. And so hoping we can just inspire each other to keep going and maybe learn some best practices. And I'll just share a little bit about what we're doing at NIA. So NIA means intention and purpose. And we do everything we can with intention and purpose. So from researching our companies to engaging with them to the way we build our own firm. So we are a B Corp certified. We're also Gender Equity Now certified. And so really meaning that all of our practices are those that are needed to build a just and inclusive economy. And so we're looking at that also into our companies. And so rather than an Exxon, which, and no offense to anybody on the screen that invests in Exxon, we just have our 6 solution themes, and we're really looking to invest into those companies that are needed for the next economy. So for us, that means renewable energy, and it also means inclusivity. And so all of our companies are working on one or more solutions that are absolutely needed for this world. And then kind of on the flip side, on the reverse, where we don't have any exposure to our greatest risks, which we definitely find fossil fuels to be in that category. So when we come to engagements, it looks a little bit different. We do engage with every one of our portfolio holdings, and rather than on their core business models, we actually love their core business models, and we see them having the best IP and being the most innovative. What we want to encourage them to do, either celebrate that they're already doing it and then also encourage them to go further, is diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. So we are talking to companies about their recruitment process. You know, are they in their communities? Are they in local high schools, letting them know, you know, what it is they do so that they can start to create visions and dreams for young kids, particularly women and people of color. So what does recruitment look like for these companies? What does their hiring process look like? Then also promotions and of course retention. You know, we're also making sure that they have nomination committees on their boards that are looking to eliminate blind spots. You know, so do they have resumes that are really expansive across industries rather than just your force them on the golf club, which honestly is, you know, I don't need to tell anyone on the screen, that's actually where a lot of board nominations come from, is your golfing partners. So rather than that, expanding networks so that we can improve the diversity and inclusion across both corporate America and beyond.
Well, thank you, Kristin. I think it sounds so important when you use your voice as an investor to drive change, and then some of it is beyond the allocation. And so, Sherry, I'd like to hear from you a little bit more about the ways that we can use our voices and networks to support durable and systems change needed now. And Dina, feel free to weigh in on that as well. I think some of what you all do is also in collaboration and you know, providing sunlight to certain issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, there are many private employers that have very good policies. There are some that don't. I think, though, that with respect to legislative change, it's really important for people who care about these issues to really be engaged, at least to the extent of knowing what's going on in their localities and their states and at the federal level, and to engage with their legislators on these issues. It has really struck me over the years how much legislators actually do listen, particularly at the local and state level, but even at the federal level. They want to, you know, they're, now that we're, you know, in this fight over enacting a national paid family medical leave program, there are some legislators who say, well, I haven't heard from anybody. I don't know that it's really important. So I think it's very important that there be an understanding that your voices are important, and that you do have some power here, and you do have the power not just at the ballot box, but also in engaging with the people who represent you, both in Washington and also when they come to your communities. And along those lines, particularly, everybody follows the news, the national news, but things that are happening on the ground, you can have a lot of influence on particularly localities and your communities. So I just think just knowing what's going on and really using your voice, it's very, very important.
Yeah, and just
Go ahead.
to add to that, and you know, sharing your story, and just couldn't agree with that comment more. Just to add, also, you know, unpaid leave, you know, business voices are really very important. So not just sharing your voice as an individual, but if there are, you know, if you have the position within your company to, you know, express support for a program, I mean, it goes a long way. I mean, we have a number of businesses that are speaking out. We need to keep building that list, showing the support. This is, a critical moment in the fight for, ensuring that all workers and not just select few of us have access to these basic protections so they can care for themselves and their loved ones. And then, I would also say along your, the work you do around financial literacy, I would just, knowledge is power. It really deeply continues to upset me, even that while there are new laws and new protections that we need in this country, there are a lot that do exist on the books that workers, especially low-wage workers, have no idea about. But so being a community ambassador in your own right, we have, to be sharing resources and information, supporting efforts to get the word out, empower lower wage women, more vulnerable women to have access to free legal services and to be able to understand and advocate makes such a huge difference in their abilities to be able to stay healthy and attached to the workforce. So that would just be, another really important way you can engage as an individual. And we have a Know Your Rights database. We have tons of information. We host webinars, so just expanding and sharing those resources and information is incredibly helpful. And you never know who's going to need it.
Absolutely. And I think, you both talk so eloquently about protecting workers' rights and the variety of worker types that we have out there. And I think, Julie, you have another example of a worker protection fight to potentially talk about out of California. Can you share a little bit more about that story?
Thank you. Yeah, you're breaking up. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Everyone's saying, just from a shareholder perspective, one of the sectors garment workers in the world are women. Women workers in the sector exposed to very vulnerable conditions due to high levels of gender discrimination, sexual harassment and abuse, and really a lack of means to report that abuse. And women have also been, I think, disproportionately affected by wage drops during COVID. And pay for garment workers is often quota-based. Meaning that workers must complete a certain amount of work before they'll get paid. And in order to meet these quotas, sometimes workers need to work overtime, of course, but aren't paid all of the time for these extra hours. So one thing my firm does, Christian Brothers, engage some of the major apparel manufacturers in the world, like Hugo Boss, Uniqlo, Hermes, Hanes, Victoria's Secret, talking to them about these issues. And, I know Nia was talking about, at that fund, they select a core basket of companies. One of the things my firm does is go to the largest and say, how can you take your technological expertise and know-how, and how can you shift your business model to help the greatest number of workers? And so one of the things we do as investors is also leverage our assets in support of public policy. Because it can be meaningful to really take that time to send a signal to legislators that our investors are watching. And this is important. So one of the things that we're supporting right now is SB 62. It's the Garment Workers Protection Act right here in California. Progressive piece of legislation that could help to move the needle right here at home. And the organization, one of underground economy, like a system where unscrupulous employers are able to cheat workers out of wages owed to them and really kind of restrict wages and overtime laws. And in no industry really are these violations more widespread than in garment center. So we're talking to companies, we're talking to legislators and trying to send our support to SB 62. Things are looking good. for that legislation right now. And it sets rules to ensure wages aren't stolen and disallows retailers from using layers of contractors to really avoid responsibility under the law. Workers, they're estimating making about $5 an hour, working 60 to 80 hours a week. And in many instances not getting paid for these efforts. So investors taking action, sending a letter to California legislators, and this is something that we can do. We can all ask our favorite garment companies, what are they doing on SB 62? They could be supporting this legislation. To companies in the apparel and footwear about wage theft, about forced labor, about human trafficking, all different ways investors can use their voice and their assets.
And you also use the proxy ballot to fight here. And can you share a little bit about the 64 proxy ballots that you had around DEI with ICCR just in 2020 and what they accomplished?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, at Christian Brothers, we work on a whole range of issues, right? And many of these things so holistic and interrelated. But, you know, I gave the example of Exxon and climate change. Now I'm talking just recently, 2 seconds ago, about forced labor, human trafficking, and wage theft. But another issue that we work on is in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, you know, I'm on the board of the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. And one of the things we do is file shareholder resolutions, just like we did at Exxon, but we file them on this issue of diversity. And one of the things that ICCR members do, and ICCR is about 350 faith-based investors, socially responsible investment firms, pension funds, unions, NGOs, with about $500 billion in assets, all working together. And one of our core issues this year is addressing systemic racism, and filed resolutions taking direct aim at workplace policies and really trying to talk to companies about their culture. And altogether, ICCR members on a whole range of topics filed 244 resolutions at companies calling for change using our assets. And of those, 64 were filed on racial justice, whether that's gender equity, pay equity, calling on companies to disclose workforce data. How are women and people of color, for example, advancing through the system? How are they making sure people are getting equal levels of pay? And what are the retention and promotion rates happening at the company? Because it's not just about disclosing their workforce. How are they making sure people are advancing through the system? So filed 64 resolutions, ICCR members all working together. And that's a 50% increase from last year. You can see how this issue has really percolated. And I think, you know, this issue, this moment that we're in, and this public debate has really helped to galvanize a lot of these workplace equity conversations. At a lot of these 64 proposals that were filed, a lot of times we withdrew them. So we didn't go to a vote like we did at Exxon. Some cases, companies said, you know what, I'm willing to talk to you. And so organizations like the Franciscan Sisters, Trillium Asset Management, even the New York State Retirement Fund, filing American Express, Berkshire Hathaway, Alphabet, calling on them to take action to ensure women and this is an important issue, but as investors, we found that it actually benefits shareholders when companies are more diverse. So looking forward to really moving the needle. As you probably have seen, numbers are really pitiful. I think one of the last reported pieces of data, 2017 US Census data on median earnings for full-time year-round workers found that women made 80% less than their male counterparts. The gap for African-American and Latino women, 60%, 55% compared to male counterparts. And at this current rate, women will not reach pay parity until it's estimated 2059. So it's really critical that we keep moving this and using our voice, whether it's through legislation, whether it's through the proxy ballot. My colleagues that have spoken all taking incredible amounts of action. That's so inspiring, but that's some of the work we're doing on the proxy.
And I think that really dovetails to some of the work that Kristin was talking about earlier, and the ways that they are influencing companies directly. And Kristin, if you can share a little bit more about what else investors need to know and be empowered to do right now in this moment, and some of the other levers that you're using in your work.
Well, in this moment, so thanks for the question. And Julie, of course, thanks for all of your work. We are proud members of some of your organizations and love to work collaboratively. So it's great to have all of us on the screen. And so I think the most important thing women can do in particular is really own that we are investors. And whether that means you have a credit card or a bank statement, or you're actually making investments into companies. I think the patriarchy is there to mask that and make it confusing for us. So to the extent that we can own that and then really direct the money into those companies that are representing the economy that we want to see, we do get the economy that we invest into. So can it be one that is inclusive, sustainable, and just? And so what we're hoping to do is, really highlight those companies that are doing the best. And then what we do is, those that have the best IP, that have the best solutions, as I mentioned earlier, don't always have the best practices for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's where our shareholder engagement comes in. And people often ask me, well, what can you do? You're a small boutique asset manager and you don't have enough shares. Well, it turns out that you can make a difference. So, as Exxon is now showing, everybody that cumulative effort that went in there, we actually won a shareholder resolution for diversity reporting, because we know that companies need to start somewhere and they need to start being transparent about what they're doing. So we're asking all of our companies to put out diversity reports, and then we're instructing them what is the most needed, what's the most helpful to report and how to do that. At any rate, we won at IBM this spring with 94% of the vote. So that's pretty unheard of. And I mention it because we all can make a difference. So if your asset manager is not voting your proxies right now or filing shareholder resolutions, and I guess I'll just back up to say, we do seek to build win-win relationships with all of our companies. We're really in this for the long term, and we think that human face and connection can go a long way. It's more when they're not moving fast enough toward what the mutual, what we've agreed on or what we haven't agreed on, where we do use the shareholder resolution as a tool, because it definitely gets their attention, when they have to respond to the SEC, and not every company wants a statement on their proxy ballot, with an investor challenge. So they'll often work behind the scenes. But at any rate, something you can do today, make sure that your proxies are being voted. Your asset manager should be doing that. Your advisor should be doing that. If not, we do it all in-house. So that just comes with part of what we do. You definitely should. I mean, there's no shoulds. And yet I do encourage people that's definitely a way to make a big difference, is make sure that you're being active with your shares and making sure that these companies are moving toward the world that we want to see. And then just a plug for all the female asset managers on this call. Another way to diversify your portfolio in a really significant way, the Knight study that came out, they didn't have enough of us to even fit on a chart, so they combined women and people of color together. And women and people of color together make up 1.3% of the asset management of the 70 trillion out there. So diversify and choose a female asset manager. And we have to work harder to be in this industry, and it's probably likely, I mean, we can't promise anything, and yet your returns are going to be pretty good. So for all female asset managers.
I just wanted to jump in and add one thing, if I may, Monique.
Absolutely.
We've seen, a lot of beautiful sounding DEI policies that companies put out, but we see behind the curtain in terms of what is really going on. So as responsible investors, to really look and ask the questions, are policies like paid leave available across the board to all workers? For example, we know Walmart, we know part-time workers don't have access to paid leave. And we have people calling our helpline saying, I need to reduce my schedule by 1 hour because of some medical issue. But if I do, I'm not going to be able to access paid leave. But people don't necessarily know that. And also, policies, a lot has to do with procedures. I totally echo Julie. I mean, we need transparency around not just what the policies say, but into procedures, because oftentimes it's procedures and HR practices that are used to mislead and misinform workers and really, create a chilling effect for them in terms of being able to understand and exercise their rights. I will say that we at A Better Balance, several years ago, we had a big win working with filing a shareholder resolution, working with another organization and bringing a litigation against Walmart. And after years of advocacy and investor pressure, Walmart ended up, changing its pregnancy accommodation policy. So it really does matter. Investor pressure really makes a difference. And so really just so excited to hear about the work and this, commitment. It's so we have to, there's no magic bullet, right? We need legislative reform, we need culture change, and we need investor pressure, all working together to make change, system-wide change. And by the way, this is a racial justice issue, right? I mean, just the issues that Sherry and I, we talk about DEI and racial justice and we separate. I mean, the fact is, I just wanted to really put a pin in the fact that those of you who read the article on Amazon and the New York Times, I mean, it is disproportionately, Black and brown workers who are, totally taken advantage of on the retail and on the warehouse floor and and lack these basic benefits. So this is a gender justice issue and it's a racial justice issue. So to think more holistically about when we talk about what racial justice is, to look at some of these policies, and not just necessarily how many, people are in X position.
Absolutely, and I think that brings us to where we might go with Q&A. And folks, please get your questions organized and off to us in the chat. And we think about women as creators of our own destiny, and we think about this gender justice and racial justice, climate justice. These justice fights are all interconnected. And these are some innovative solutions and practices that these ladies have shared with us. But we're in a unique moment, potentially, of openness around societal change. Because of the pandemic, where there's awareness of systems that we've never had before. Certainly some folks have been fighting a long fight for decades with that, with those intentions, but there are some who just woke up yesterday. So we need to bring those newly converted to this challenge along and quickly. Certainly the new administration is one of the sea changes that we can hope for to continue to drive towards greater change. But there's places in the world where some of these protections that we're talking about now, new for us, have been around. Someone in the chat asked earlier on, in France, they have many of these protections, but women still don't make it to the C-suite. And we still have struggles with getting women on boards. There's still more men named John as CEOs than are women in the Fortune 100 leading companies, right? So when we think about the fight and how to get past these glass ceilings, I'd like to hear from all of our panelists as the other questions come in around what we can do to, move the needle that much further. We've talked about workers at the bottom, and there's so much work to do, but there's also work to do at the board level and at the C-suite. And what are some of your thoughts on ways we can break those barriers as well? And maybe Julie, can we start with you on this one?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that first of all, I mean, we haven't really talked a lot about consumer power. And I think one thing just to consider, because I think a lot of people don't recognize the power that they do have, both to make decisions in terms of supporting companies that are doing well on certain issues, but also writing to companies. I think a lot of companies don't get a lot of emails from people who buy their products or who have shares. So, it was just shocking to me when I look at some of the numbers. And I was reading a report recently, and it was an article about how we're making progress, and it was saying, like, isn't it great that almost half of the 100 largest companies release their EEO data? I was like, that's pitiful, that we're at this point where only 46% of companies are releasing in the S&P 500 very basic workforce composition data. And I know in the chat, somebody was asking, how can we make sure that women are advancing, that, and I don't know how women are doing. I don't know how people of color are doing unless companies are disclosing that. So I think there needs to be, I mentioned 64 resolutions at ICCR, and that's great. And that's a 50% increase. We need to get investors far more galvanized, right? We need to get PRI, which is about 2,000 investors with 90 trillion in assets, all taking up this gauntlet. Can't be just ICCR, but through conversations, because like Kristin, we also try to build positive, constructive relationships with companies. But this has been going on for too long. And I feel like there needs to be a lot more agitation going on. We need to be filing at companies. We need to be doing much better and having a goal where the biggest companies in the world, half of them are still not disclosing. That's just not sufficient. And sometimes the way to wake things up is through this resolution process, which works only in countries where you can file. Not all countries can you file. US you can file, UK you can file, strong actions there. But I feel like the investors have to also use the power of public policy. It's got to be this holistic process where we're not just filing, we're following it up with legislation. We're putting pressure on our legislators, whereas consumers, we're writing to companies using our power. I feel like in some cases, we're not always pulling all our levers at the same time, working with all the partners. Like, I would love to follow up with a better balance and chat with you, because I feel like energized by everything that you're saying. So I'll stop there. Just one bit of information, and it's not just workforce data. I need to know the promotion. How are you promoting people? How are you retaining people? And how are you recruiting people? So I don't just want the EEO data. I want to see the whole picture on how people are advancing, how you're keeping them, what you're paying them, and how I know there's equity. And I need to work on multiple ways to make that happen.
Some folks in the impact sector are talking about adding another E to ESG, which stands for employees, because, broken out from the S, focusing on labor, the rights, modern slavery, all of these other issues, the care economy are a bit subsumed. And it has so many different potential prongs that one way to potentially highlight workers, and there needs to be protections and new legislation needed to ensure and codify durable changes that we'd like to see, is bumping out the E to another E, which I think is an interesting idea and really speaks to, I think, some of the work that you, Dina, and Sherry have really been talking about so far. And if you can just add on to what Julie has been sharing around really how much more we can do. Can we do more together? And the radical collaborations, I think that we've sort of hinted at, but not called out directly. And some of the other folks that you all work with in order to get bipartisan legislation in this climate, even as a phrase that can even be said.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that, the work that that Julie and Kristin are doing around, kind of corporate responsibility, and the work that we're doing that's more legislative in nature. I mean, there should be some kind of way to bring those together. And there are some efforts, and I think probably Julie's been working also with some groups that are working, on employee rights, and that synergy is really great, and it's happening somewhat, but not enough. And I think that's something that we could really stand to talk more about. I think it is definitely would help both, getting legislative legislation passed that would be helpful, but also to really help change culture. So I think working together is a wonderful idea, really.
I feel like one of the other prongs that we don't often call out specifically is narrative change, and telling these stories of workers, of women, of fighters, of the way that investors have been collaborative. Particularly someone on the chat mentioned that engine number one didn't talk about it on their spot on Bloomberg TV or at a conference or something. Women, we work so much. I mean, some of the ways that women work just really naturally include collaboration. I don't want to be sexist about saying that, but I think that is one thing that, you know, a lot of women actually want and strive for in their way that they work. And does anyone want to talk about really that we as women have maybe a unique perspective, or the ability as women to maybe see past and to get to change and to focus on outcomes and not, you know, leave egos. I always talk about in impact investing, really finance in general. It's such an ego-driven culture, which is really your own portfolio. And as you think about systems change work that I do with TIIP, you know, we need to collaborate, which means you're putting down your ego to work with someone else and finding our shared North Star. And so many of us, you know, we're thinking about systems change. Does anyone else want to comment on how we do that and really get around some of these really ways that don't serve us because they've come from other communities, male-dominated communities? And the stat was not too long ago, I think Kristin shared it, 1.7. That's not enough women. That's not enough people of color moving these trillions of dollars. And what would look like if we were to actually harness and control and have more power in this conversation? Maybe Kristin, I'll ask you to go first.
1.3. It's terrible. It's just
Even
terrible.
worse.
I know, it's just, I hate to even say it or emphasize it. And yet, I think that statistic just says so much for our economy. And, you know, obviously it's women on this panel. Of course, we know who's, you know, what organization we're at. And yet, what if there were more women making investment decisions? You know, what if there were more women saying, hey, we need diversity reporting. We need this. You know, I think if we had more asset managers that were women, our world would be really different. You know, the types of companies that would get investment will be different because we think differently. We bring a different perspective. And so, of course, a diverse team is great. Having women in leadership might be what our economy needs to survive. What more were you hoping to hear from me on that one?
No, that's good. And Julie, Sherry, please, Dina, pipe in here if you'd like to reply on that one as well. I think after this, we're going to transition to the breakouts in a moment as well.
No, I think that was well said. I mean, I totally agree. We need to use our voices and work together. And I think that's part of, that's been kind of the ongoing theme of this conversation. Alone, you're not as powerful as you are together. And that's true, and that's also, knowledge and another cliche, knowledge is power. I mean, we really need to know what's going on at the companies, on the ground, in our country, and what are representatives, what are male representatives, what the people who run our companies are doing about the issues that are important to us and important to our society. So, that's what I would say, and that's something we can all do together.
Thank you for that. And I think at this point we're going to transition to the breakouts. Catherine or Alyssa, do you want to chime in here and then describe what's going to happen next?
Alyssa, there you are. I'll let you, we're going into breakouts. The goal is to talk a lot about this radical collaboration, as Monique calls it, and how can we collaborate? What have we heard today that we are going to take away and as action steps and to share more of those ideas together. I think this was an inspiring conversation for me. In the planning of this, we had the hopes that this would be a sense of how all of these things actually intersect and weave together. Monique, you talked about the silk fabric, right? So I think you've done an incredible job of setting the stage for what we go do tomorrow. Alyssa, I think you're transitioning us. Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank
thank
you.
you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. We're gonna open the breakout rooms in just a moment. And as I mentioned at the top, and as Catherine mentioned, this is a space for you to network, talk with one another, meet one another, and talk about inspiration and ideas that you've taken from today. From the top down, from the investor level, what can you do in your home, in your community, in your offices, in government, and in the boardroom? So then we'll spend about 20-25 minutes. We'll come back just for a few minutes at the end to wrap up, share anything in the larger group that you want to share, and go from there. If you want to get more involved with High Water Women, please email me. We would love to have you as a part of our